everybody, it's Dr. McDowell. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 8, which is Assessment of Learning, both the methods of assessment and issues with assessment. So we open with a diagram, like a cycle of assessment. It's definitely a cyclical process that just keeps repeating itself. So you start over here with the development of the instrument. So when you are planning to assess your students, and actually before you even start instruction, you should always start with your assessment first. And your assessment instrument is going to be what you use to find out if students know what you need them to know. So the process includes designing questions. It includes coming up with tasks to collect information. So maybe they're going to do a series of tasks to demonstrate mastery. Maybe it's using manipulatives in a math class or filling out a plot map for a language arts class. So tasks are one way. So you have to develop the assessment instrument. Then you need to collect your data. So then you measure. This is the ranking of individuals on the basis of the information collected. So you have your high to low. So you can see if there are any trends in the data. If all of your students are doing like 95% and higher on their tasks, you might think, okay, this might be a little too easy. If like everybody's getting like 30% or lower, then you think, wow, this is really way too hard. But you won't know that until you do the measurement. So you find the scores, and then you interpret that data. And that's where you make judgments, where you decide, okay, wow, that material is way too hard for everybody. That material is way too easy for everybody. Or maybe you find that your students are all over the place, and then you know you have to work with them in small groups to get them, all situated. So you take the data, and then you make some judgments, and then you use that data to drive your instruction. So if I know that all my students are struggling with a concept I'm trying to teach them, then I know I need to go back and do some reteaching. And so that's my next lesson plan comes from the data. So it's a whole cycle. It just keeps repeating all through your teaching career. So there are two types of assessment. There is formative assessment and there is summative assessment. Here's a quote that really helps explain what assessment is. It's written by Paul Black, and he wrote, when the cook tastes the soup, that's formative assessment, and when the customer tastes the soup, that's summative assessment. And I like this quote because if you think about cooking or working in a restaurant, cooking some soup, when you're cooking something at home, you're going to taste it and make sure, see if it needs any more seasoning, like maybe it needs more salt or onion or pepper or whatever, garlic, I don't care. And you taste it and you're like, nope, this needs something, so you add some more salt to it. You taste it again. Okay, nope, not quite right. Add some more pepper, taste it again. Perfect, right? You get to keep tasting it to make sure it's where it should be. That's formative assessment. You do that with your students. You keep taking little mini assessments to make sure all your students are where they should be. Where if you're in a restaurant and you serve that bowl of soup and the customer takes the first taste and they don't like it, that's too late. That's the summative assessment. You can't take that soup back and say, hey, let me add more salt and try it again. Like, that's too late, right? The summative assessment is the end product. It's like a final thing. So let's look further. So formative uses the root word form, right? So it's used to inform instruction. So pay close attention to that. That's a good way to remember. Formative informs instruction. It evaluates students during the work process. It's a process of gathering information to determine what students know and to determine what they can do. It's designed to provide feedback to aid in future lesson planning. It focuses on content mastery and assessment for learning, and it involves students. Very key that you involve your students. Let them be, the guide for you in designing your assessments. So here are some examples of formative assessment. Your students might do some journaling or some learning logs, maybe a concept map, a directed summarization, anecdotal records, diagnostic tests. Exit slips are a very common way to do a formative assessment. Have students write down one thing they learned before they leave, or give them a problem to solve, and if they do it correctly, you know that everybody understood the concept. So that's a very common one. The thing with formative assessment, though, it is not graded at all. Like, obviously you look at it, it's not like you ignore it. You look at it and you decide based on what you see if the students are understanding the concept, but it's not become a letter grade or a point score in any way. That's just not fair. So here's a little cartoon that I think goes along with this. So we have a doggy, and he says, I'm going to need more specific feedback on my formative assessments because he got a bad dog report card. Same thing is happening with their students. They're gonna, if you're giving them a grade, except first of all, you don't give grades, right? Your students earn grades, so remember that. But when they earn, a C or a B or an F or whatever, they shouldn't be surprised by this. They should see long before that final report card comes out, like how they're doing. They should know based on some of the activities you do in class. So summative assessment, that's a summarization of the work, right? So formative is used to drive further instruction. So I might do a lesson plan on fractions, and then I might have them do an exit slip, and I realize everybody understands fractions, so I move on and I plan my next lesson, right? Trying to keep moving them up, trying to challenge them more. Once I'm done with my whole unit, that's when I would give a summative assessment. And this is where the letter grades come in. So these are used to make an evaluation on completed work. They focus on a final product. It's a summarization of student learning. So there's that keyword again, summative and summarize. It concludes a unit. So this is always the big song and dance at the end of a unit. It's assessment of learning. And it measures student achievement at a point in time for reporting and accountability. So this is where like report cards come into play. And it sorts students in a rank order. Literally, back in the day, grades were used to rank students. The person with the highest score got the A, and the person with the lowest score got the F, and everything in between. And that's just historically how grades came about. However, that's not how we grade anymore because most professors, most schools have a percentage base, right? If you get this percentage, then you get that grade. End of story. So like I could have 5 students in my class and 5 of them get a 95 and one person gets a 94, well, that would still be an A according to my grading scale. But if I were to go with the historic, that person with the 94 would have the lowest score. That would be an F. And that's just not fair. So we don't do that anymore. But that's just a little history of grading. Some examples of summative assessments are standardized tests, unit tests, chapter tests. You see a theme evolving. Final papers and final projects. Okay, so here's another little cartoon. Based on all the head tilts, maybe I'd better explain this again, right? And you see all the little doggies. If you have a dog or if you've ever known a dog, you get the head tilt, right? When they're confused by what you're doing, they're like, what? What are you doing, huh? So yeah, that's formative assessment right there. Is the teacher is reading the room. He's seeing the body language. He's like, oh, they're all tilting their heads in confusion, so they clearly don't understand what I'm talking about, so I'm going to re-explain it. That's perfect example of of formative assessment right there. So here's a quote from our textbook, which I thought was really powerful. It is difficult, if not impossible, to judge the effectiveness of one middle school compared to another school solely based by examining standardized test scores. Remember the title of this chapter was assessment, and it was the methods and it was the issues. And here's one of our big issues is standardized test scores. Standardized tests are meant to measure students against each other. And they do that year to year. So when you're taking the ACT Aspire, it's going to measure this year's group of third graders against next year's group of third graders. And you are literally comparing apples and oranges though. Like literally that is, okay, not literally, but I mean that's like the perfect metaphor for that. Because no two students are ever exactly the same. So that's why most teachers are very much against standardized testing because, first of all, who is setting the standard? And second of all, not every student is receiving the same education in the same way and has the same background knowledge. So, judging the effectiveness of the school based on a test score, that's just silly. That's just really silly because there's so much happening with a student's life that these test administrators don't even know. And then another quote, too many factors such as socioeconomic conditions, cultural backgrounds, and cognitive development of the students are not factored into the interpretation of many standardized tests. So true. So true. So here are some reasons we need assessment though. We need to be able to determine the strengths, weaknesses, and overall academic progress of our students. We need to provide documentation of results. Your principals will want to see some kind of evidence that your students are learning. Your parents are going to want to see evidence that their children are learning. So you need that documentation to prove that yes, so-and-so has learned, 5 letters of the alphabet this year in kindergarten. More importantly, we need assessment to improve instruction. Okay, we don't know if our instruction is effective until we give an assessment. Now you'll quickly learn that not all assessments are equal. Some assessments you could spend hours writing an exam and then realize it's a horrible exam and you'd promise never to use it again. But you don't know that that was an issue until you gave that assessment. So we're constantly improving. You should be reflecting all the time when you're teaching, and that reflection process helps us improve. And then also to provide accurate information about learning to students, parents, and administrators, which I already mentioned. Um, I'm not sure why I threw this in here, but here are some more additional types of summative assessment. Oh, I see. I remember I did this. Okay, so traditionally, a summative assessment could be a multiple choice question, a true-false question, a matching question, a short answer, and an essay. That's the traditional, text test approach. There's also authentic assessments, and some courses lend themselves to authentic assessments better than others, but you have performance assessments, simulations. You could do role playing. Portfolios are a very common way to like compile like all the students' work and show growth. Exhibits. Think of your science fairs, right? Demonstrations. So those are other ways that we can get a summative assessment from our students. Okay, that's it for Chapter 8. Have a good week.